Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Monash University Surgical Interest Group's inaugural Diversity in Surgery event. Before we start proceedings, although this is a virtual event, I just wanted to first acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land I'm currently on. I would also like to pay respect to the Wurundjeri elders, past, present, and future, and extend this respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from other communities who are here with us today. So this event is sponsored by MIPS, who have kindly also offered to start by donating $50 to Pledge a Procedure, which is a foundation backed by RACS, which supports our Indigenous surgical trainees, and also have a competition running where you not only stand a chance to win $500, but they will also donate $1 per registration on top of the $50. So make sure you get onto that with details on our Facebook page. So once again, welcome. Today, we're very lucky to have an amazing lineup of panelists from incredibly diverse backgrounds, speaking about their journey in their respective fields. Obviously, in 2020, Zoom has become the main way we host these events, but in this webinar Q&A format, I just want to remind you all that you'll be driving this session with your questions, so make sure you ask them in the Q&A box just down below to the right-hand side of your Zoom screen, because although there is a chat function, we won't be monitoring that as much. So if you want to ask the panelists any questions, please ask them in the actual Q&A function. I think many of us agree that diversity has become quite a hot topic recently in light of massive social movements sweeping around the world. And as our panelists today might point out, although there has been a lot of progress in the world of surgery and healthcare, perhaps, there is still so much more work that needs to be done. And I might just now begin by letting the panel introduce themselves, a bit about who you are, your current roles, and since we always get asked this, one fun fact about yourself as well. And maybe we can just go in alphabetical order. So Justin, perhaps you can start us off.
Was not expecting to go first, but that's okay. So my name's Justin Kane. I'm a preset vascular surgery registrar at Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney. I am in my third year out of medical school, and I went to the University of Wollongong as a postgraduate medical student. My background is Aboriginal, and my family, on my dad's side of the family, we're Wadi and Yuin people from the south coast of New South Wales. And our family are the traditional owners of the Buddery National Park, which is a large national park in the region. And my mum's family are the Gamilaroi people from northwest New South Wales, a town called Moree, and another town called Coonabarabran. And my family there are the traditional owners of the Warrumbungle National Park there. So I have two ancestral lines that stem back quite a long way. And as far as I'm aware, I'm the only Indigenous vascular surgery registrar in the country, as far as I'm aware. But there are a handful of us in other specialties that are sort of up and coming now, who are getting ready to apply for training and preparing for surgical work life. I said in my bio that I'm a dumpling enthusiast, and we've spoken about that. Ria and I have spoken about that recently on Twitter. And I also have become quite a bit of a gin connoisseur, and that's demonstrated by my recent adventures here on the Central Coast as well, coming up and trying one of the Central Coast distilleries yesterday afternoon, which was quite nice. So yeah, that's me.
Great, thank you very much. Next up was going to be Neela, but since I think she's not here yet, we can just go to Paul.
Thank you. Could I just say that when I entered medical school, which was in the end of 1980, there were no Indigenous doctors in Australia at all. So I think, you know, it's astonishing and fantastic to me to see someone like Justin becoming a surgeon. It's just wonderful. A little bit about me. So yes, I left medical school a very long time ago. I've been a doctor for 32 years. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist. I've been in Melbourne now for 7 years. I grew up here and did my early medical training here, but I worked in Queensland for 20 years in cares. So I've always worked in public medicine, and I've always had a big interest in teaching and training and with an eye to the next generation to follow through, I guess. Following in Ria's footsteps, I've started, I'm partway through a Masters of Surgical Education degree, which I wish I'd done earlier. I wish it'd been available earlier. Learning all about the mistakes that I repeated in teaching medical students and junior doctors. So that's really enthused me in the last few years. And a fun fact about me is just during lockdown here, the 2 that we've had now, we've started trying to look after tropical fish. So I now have 2 tropical fish tanks, and sadly, some of them have died. So I'm really focused on applying my medical skills there.
Fantastic. Okay, and next we might just have Ria then.
Okay, takes a moment to unmute myself. So I'm Ria. I seem to be a bad influence on everyone, having having indulged in dumplings with Justin and gotten Paul into a master's. I grew up and trained in New Zealand. I'm of Chinese ethnicity originally, obviously, and but I do consider myself mostly a New Zealander. And I wish that we had their level of COVID control, I have to say, living over here in Australia. I am a general and breast surgeon on the Gold Coast, but I'm also the chair of the College of Surgeons Operating with Respect Committee. And I'm also an associate professor with Bond University on the coast and train medical students right through to post-tertiary. So training people like Justin right up to consultancy level. I am, I suppose, a notoriously noisy advocate for diversity and inclusion of all sorts, and prefer to take a very wide and intersectional view about it. So we're not just talking about observable things like race and gender, but we're also talking about non-observable things like gender and sexuality diversity, but even more so, you know, that we have a need for people with lots of different hobbies, you know, other than, say, rugby and cricket. I mean, there's nothing wrong with rugby and cricket, it's just that there's been a rather heavy interest in it in surgical circles traditionally. So it's nice to have diversity of hobbies, diversity of interests, diversities of religions, diversities of thoughts and cultures, right down to things like neurodiversity, you know, people who think in different ways. So fun fact about me, I am an avid crocheter. And back when I started on Twitter, even when I only had a few hundred followers, one of my unexpectedly viral tweets was about getting called out for crocheting in a surgical meeting. And so as a result of that, I have steadfastly carried on crocheting in surgical meetings. And it will not surprise you that below the view line, I have a project underway.
Great, thank you so much. Great, so with the panelists that we have here so far then, while we wait for the last couple to come through, we might just start off by asking just a fairly broad question then. So tell us about your career so far as both a health professional and as someone from a diverse, quote unquote, non-traditional background. And this can be, you can answer it any way you want, but just something to start us off with.
You can go first, Ria.
Where do I start? I think the thing is, you know, so my path was fairly non-traditional as far as surgery goes, because I wasn't one of those at medical school who thought that I wanted to do it. And looking back, it was probably because there were existing biases, you know, so quite early on in medical school, of course, you get fed the story that, you know, surgery is hard for women, it's hard to balance it with family, it's a really long training program, are you sure you want to do it, you might not be strong enough in a physical sense, how are you going to balance the babies? And of course, you know, I think every woman in med school is kind of used to that narrative. It didn't occur to me back then that that was a narrative that was true for everyone, really, because surgery is just a demanding specialty, but it was only sold to the women and not so much to the men. Anyway, so I graduated wanting to be a GP, and then because we ended up posted to quite a small hospital in New Zealand called Rotorua Hospital, there was no choice but to learn to do some minor surgical procedures, because that's how those small hospitals work. You know, there's very little senior. Back then, Rotorua didn't have an advanced trainee. So between you and the boss, you know, between the intern and resident and the boss, there was very little in the way of layers of hierarchy. So you got upskilled very quickly, because otherwise the poor old boss had to do absolutely everything. So we learned to stitch and tie and, you know, do minor procedures in ED and that sort of thing. As time went on, the bosses would say, you know, come up to theatre and give me a hand with this. And as I became more capable, they'd say, you've actually got quite good hands. Do you think you should do surgery? And I would always say, nah, training's too long, want to have a family, blah, blah, blah. And really, my husband and I went backpacking in our PGY3 year. Like, we just literally took the whole year off and went backpacking around the world. And I guess it was during that year that we reflected a little bit. And I thought, actually, the thing I miss most about all my work is the surgery, the actual operating bit. So when I came back, I kind of threw myself into applying for surgery with what I thought was a pathetic CV, because all my mates had been slaving away, you know, doing higher research degrees and research projects and getting mentors, and here I was flapping around, not even sure I wanted to be a surgeon. Rather remarkably, they actually accepted me that year for advanced training, so I found myself suddenly on advanced training, and it sort of carried on from there until the second year of advanced training, when I fell pregnant. And this caused quite a stir that hadn't kind of happened before in the New Zealand training program, and the local board didn't really have a well-developed pathway for it. So we made it up as we went along. There were a few moments where we had to kind of get a little bit legal and actually point out their legal obligations to support things like breastfeeding at work. But in the end, it all worked out all right. And as you see me, I have become a consultant, and I have kids who are now teenagers, and, you know, although I took a year out to go backpacking and a year or two out for the kids along the way, it doesn't seem to have hampered me in the long term. So that's me in terms of my career as a health professional. But as a person of diversity, the thing is that, you know, I met an awful lot of microaggressions, and even then I had it better than the generation before me. So the women, there were already senior women surgeons when I became a surgeon, but they were few and far between. A lot of them were incredibly tough, you know, really something that you couldn't see yourself aspiring to, because they were just so incredibly amazing. And so it was a little bit better, but even so, there were regular daily microaggressions. You know, come on, put some muscles into it, grow some balls, or you know, if you were upset about a patient outcome, you know, someone had died or had a bad complication, you know, if you showed even the faintest bit of emotion, you know, you were called soft and don't be such a woman, and, you know, try the word professional, you know, you have to be more professional, meaning be less like a woman was how it came across. Anyway, these things are things that you just sort of file away as you're coming through. The hierarchical setup at the time wasn't very conducive to speaking up as a medical student or as a trainee. It's been really heartening to find that has changed now, so there is more room for advocacy even for medical students and trainees. But back then, you know, you just didn't say boo, you put your head down and you just worked through it. But I did think to myself, when I become a consultant, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. So in due course, I became a consultant and I did X, Y, Z. So, you know, got myself onto committees, started teaching college courses, started spreading my slightly crazy ideas around the hallways, you know. I think people got sick and tired of me kind of bailing them up and saying, you know, it strikes me that we've got this imbalance, you know, in gender, or this kind of complete lack of certain races, or that I haven't yet met a single LGBTQI surgeon yet, you know, and what do you think we should do about it? And in the beginning, of course, there was a bit of you're being oversensitive, Ria, or you're making a big thing out of nothing, or no one's ever complained about it before. You know, you're overcalling it. But as the years have gone by, I think those ideas have taken root, and not just from me, obviously. I think there's a growing feeling in wider society that just because things are minorities doesn't mean that we can just ignore them completely. So that's me.
Right, thank you. Justin, did you want to go next, or?
So my medical career is only, like, I'm still quite junior. So I'm a PGY3 doctor now. I finished medical school in 2017, and I, at the time, it seemed like a really big step going from a resident to an unaccredited registrar, which is something that I've been reflecting on now as it's sort of job time. So I feel like I've taken a bit more of a crash course into the realm of vascular surgery that people typically don't do. They usually do a couple of SRMO years and get a bit of experience in other fields, and then they start tailoring their careers towards the specialty that they want to do. So for me, medical school, growing up, I didn't know there were any Aboriginal doctors in the country at all. I didn't know that it was a possible career pathway for me and my family and other people. But it wasn't until I was in year 11, when I was a high school student, that I heard about Kelvin Kong, who's the first Aboriginal surgeon in the country. And he had just finished his fellowship training, and he'd just become a qualified ENT surgeon. And for me, being a young Aboriginal kid at high school, that meant the world. So seeing a role model, someone who had been through the pathway, meant a lot to me. And then I knew that it was possible. Like Ria, you experience a lot of microaggressions and discrimination, and jump a lot of hurdles along the way. And that goes right back to as early as high school, where career advisors and other people just sort of resigned themselves to the fact that because you're Aboriginal, you can go into be a tradie or learn how to do something else, or all you guys are good at sport, so why don't you try and get into sport rather than pursuing an academic career. And then coming through university and navigating Western education systems has been quite difficult. And so the way I often describe it in similar talks that I give is, for us, it's about working in two worlds. So you're torn between your cultural understanding and constructs and family and kinship systems and education systems, but you also have to navigate biomedical knowledge and Western understanding of medicine, which is quite difficult and does take its toll on you. And the way I described it in a previous talk is it's almost like a death by 1,000 cuts. So you get all of these sort of microaggressions and face all of these sort of micro issues along the way through your path, that it's not a fatal blow, but it's something that sort of wears you down and wears your spirit down over time. And so medical school for me, I feel like a lot of people questioned my place because people would often say, like, there were lines such as, oh, you must have been offered one of the Aboriginal positions in medical school, or the only reason why you got in is because you're Indigenous, etc., etc. And so you face a lot of that. And then you face a lot of that throughout medical school because there are systems in place that offer support for Indigenous medical students, and people perceive that as you being what's the word? They think that that's an advantage to you and that it's unfair that they are missing out, and don't see it for what it actually is, and don't see the disparity that already exists between people of different cultures who attend medical school. And so I felt for a good while, I sort of had to justify my place in medical school, but I was lucky enough that I have the cultural strength and the cultural upbringing that I had in my communities to sort of stand up for myself and be able to, and like quick-witted enough to be able to have comebacks to those sort of questions. And so Ria often talks about like responses to microaggressions by asking questions and things like that. So I would often then inform people about the pathway that I take. So I had to sit the same exams as you, have the same CV as you, have the same GPA as you, sit the same interviews as you. But on top of that, I then had a separate interview, like the Indigenous candidates had another interview. So if anything, it was harder for me to get into medical school than harder for you. Like, so reframing your path to show other people that, look, you think that it's easy to get into medical school as an Indigenous person when it actually isn't. I've been quite blessed with regards to the mentors that I have, and that's something that I encourage all medical students and junior doctors and anyone to have, is to find yourself solid mentors. And you don't have to have just one mentor, you can have many different mentors. So I have a huge variety of mentors, people who I'm quite close with as well, who are actively engaged in enabling me and my career and providing me with opportunities. And it just so happens that a lot of my mentors also happen to be female surgeons. And again, Ria talks about this a lot, but this harks back to the intersectionality, where all of these people, all people who are from a minority group or from a subsect of society, band together in order to navigate the system, the education system, for example. And so for me, I had quite a lot of female mentors backing me through medical school, through junior doctor years, and providing me with surgical opportunities as an intern and a resident that people at my level could never imagine. So I've been lucky with that. And now that I'm slowly becoming a little bit more senior, I see the influence that I have now myself as a registrar on medical students and on junior doctors, who sort of really look towards you for advice now. And now I see the value in what I was given from my female surgical mentors, that I have to now pass on to other people as well. Personally, that sort of covers both questions, I think. Like it's a bit of a combined thing. Like as an Indigenous person, having to navigate two worlds is important. Having your cultural strength provide you with a backbone to get through surgical training, medical school, junior doctor years, and having strong mentors, they're the things that sort of really have made up my career so far.
Great, thank you very much, Justin. Oh, before we get to you, I think Dr. Binka Baranga has just arrived. So Binka, would it be all right if you introduce yourself to the rest of the panel and our attendees as well?
Yeah, no worries. Hi, thanks for having me. Sorry that I'm late. I'm doing a exam prep course on that other, like in another Zoom group. Yeah, my name's Binka Baranga. I'm a Warora woman from Western Australia. I grew up in the north of Western Australia in the Kimberley region, and moved to Perth for high school and then university. I did my medical education at the University of Western Australia. and my internship in Western Australia at Sir Charles Gardner Hospital, and then moved to Victoria in 2018 when I took a job at the Royal Children's as a surgical resident. And it was kind of during that time that I really discovered that I liked surgery. I always had the inkling that I was surgically inclined, but that year was definitely the year that I decided that I wanted to pursue surgery as a career. And then at the beginning of that year, I thought that I wanted to do ENT. I think Justin was talking about Kelvin. He's one of my mentors and a close friend. So, you know, I was kind of thinking that I wanted to do pediatric ENT, and I applied for critical care training as part of the prerequisite to get into ENT set training, and did a year at Monash as an ICU resident. And then actually during 2018, once I'd already got the position as an ICU resident, I discovered my love for general surgery, and this is definitely kind of the area that I want to go into. Saying that, I did the ICU year, and it was very, I think, well, for me, it was a great learning experience. It was definitely something that I felt was important for me before I took on the responsibility of becoming a registrar, having kind of a solid foundation of medicine before you begin any kind of surgical training is important. And so I did that year, and then I applied for registrar positions, and I'm currently a surgical registrar at Western Health, and which has been a very steep learning curve. I mean, it's been great. Western Health is an amazing health service, and I feel very well supported, and I've had an opportunity to do a lot of solo surgeries and assist on large surgeries and emergencies. And I've just spent 6 months at Sunshine, first as a surgical registrar, and then the night surgical registrar that I just finished. And they have, really high acuity and very a large variety of patients and presentations, and a very diverse population of patients as well, which I really enjoy. And I would say I more so enjoy than when I worked at Monash, particularly. I think I've had a lot of patients that kind of relate to me as an Indigenous doctor, and not necessarily as Indigenous patients, but people from minorities, and they can kind of identify with me and I can identify with them, which I think is really great and kind of improves patient care. And now I'm at Footscray, and on a team that allows me to finish at 5 o'clock on a Friday, which is really strange, but I'm not mad at that. So that's kind of, I guess, my journey so far. End goal, I'd really love to go home to the Kimberley and be a surgeon and work within my community and with my people and on country. And I guess my kind of 40-year plan is to set up Aboriginal health services within communities, starting in my own community, obviously because I have a foundation there and I know the people there and I know kind of the politics there, and then to see where that kind of takes me. But yeah, thanks for having me, and hope that I can be an assist in anything and answer your questions appropriately and to the best of my ability. So thanks.
Great, thank you very much. And just to remind you, I don't know if you were there when we asked the first question, but it's essentially just asking what your journey has been like as someone from a diverse or non-traditional background in something like surgery. Yeah, okay, great. So moving to Paul now.
Before I talk about my journey, could I just, one of the questions was the advice one of the one of the observers said, been given advice to defer pregnancy while she tries to achieve surgical training. And I just think that's absolutely terrible advice. It was from a male doctor. And I've seen so much heartbreak from female specialists in my own specialty who have deferred childbearing and they're infertile at the end of their training. And I think you should have a baby when you want to and when you're ready to, and you should be supported by medical colleges and also your employee to do so. I'd be really interested in what Ria has to say on that, because she alluded to it as well. But I think I really had to make a comment on it because I feel so strongly about it.
Sorry, are you waiting for a comment from me?
I am, Ria.
Yeah. I mean, so basically, discrimination on the basis of gender is, you know, forbidden. There are specific policies and also legal frameworks in Australia that make it illegal. The problem is, of course, what's legal and what might be judged by your peers are two different things. So while you can absolutely take maternity leave whenever you like during surgery and theoretically not have an impact on your surgical training, the reality is you may still come across colleagues and seniors who will judge you for that and build it sort of unconsciously, or even sometimes terribly consciously, into the selection process when they grade you or give you references, believing that somehow it demonstrates a lack of commitment to surgery, or that you're not strong enough to take it, or whatever. All of that I reject strongly, of course. I have been asked this, you know, this is a very frequent question from people, you know, when should I have babies during training? And increasingly it's not just the women who are asking you, but the men as well, because we mustn't forget that this is the 21st century and people like to share, you know, like to bring up their own children, funnily enough. You know, amazing thought that you'd actually want to be a parent when you have a child. So, you know, little people are disruptive to anyone's lives, but they are the most wonderful thing. And I wouldn't give up my kids for the world. Like, I'd rather give up my surgery than give up my kids. I'll tell you a little story. I was at a conference, you know, just around the tea and coffee station one day, and a woman came up to me with a baby in a pram and said, "Dr. Liang, this is your baby." I said, "Oh, what do you mean?" She said, "No, I came to a CRISP course and said to you, you know, when should I have babies? And you said, well, whenever is right for you and your partner, because the period of fertility is time limited, but the surgery will always be there." And so she duly went home and they got pregnant. And so this was apparently my fault that they had a baby. But everything was going fine for her. She'd been selected to surgical training and you know, the baby had, you know, obviously you take some time off for it, but it didn't seem to have affected her chances of being selected. So I think the thing about it is, if you find yourself in a team that says things like, we don't recommend that you have children during training, or we don't think it's demonstrating your commitment to surgery, then it's a problem with them, not with you. And if you can, try and find a different team. I mean, don't get them to write your references or whatever, because they've already displayed their bias. Leave the stamping out of that sort of bias and discrimination to people who actually do have the power, you know, consultants and people on selection boards. But there are teams and units, and people like Paul, who's a medical director of an entire unit, you know, who will make sure that statements like that don't go unchallenged and discriminations like that don't happen. So you can find your tribe. They exist around Australia. Yeah.
Thank you, Ria. I knew you would have firm opinions about that. I'm glad they're the same as mine. I just saw there was another comment too, that it's playing on somebody's mind a lot as a 31-year-old first-year undergraduate. And I actually think the problem's probably more acute now, or the issue's more acute. And when I went to medical school, I was 17, and we were all relatively younger. Most of the medical schools, I'm not sure about Monash, sorry, but most of them are postgrad now. So I was a consultant when I was 32. I have trainees entering the training program when they're 32. So they are really going to struggle if they defer their fertility. I've got colleagues who've had babies as single females because they cannot find somebody that meets their standards as a partner. I think you should be making those decisions actively and when it's right for you, as Leah says, but don't defer it because you think you need to rush to achieve this thing, which is a fellowship in surgery or whatever. I think that's the wrong one.
Great. And Binka, I guess you're next up.
I mean, yeah, to kind of carry on with that question, I mean, yeah, I'm a junior registrar, you know, wanting to apply to SET, and I'm a female, and I have lots of friends that are in the similar boat as me and kind of in their late 20s, mid to late 20s, early 30s. And I guess, yeah, Paul is right in saying that you have to be really kind of proactive about it. I think a really great step that I've found is, you know, having a great GP that you can talk to about fertility options, and kind of keeping that in the back of your mind. I've had a few friends this year and last year that have looked, you know, very seriously into IVF options and fertility preservation, and, you know, knowing that that's a kind of an option, particularly like people have said that, you know, if you don't have a partner, and, you know, we all know that in this job, if you don't have a partner, it's quite difficult to meet someone. But yeah, there are options out there, and just kind of, I guess, keeping that in the back of your mind. And similarly, to add on, I guess I've got lots of senior SET regs and fellows who are female and have had children, multiple children, and they come from kind of a variety of backgrounds, including, you know, single parents, parents with, you know, really kind of connected grandparents, you know, parents that have kind of medical and non-medical partners, both at kind of training level and consultant level. And I mean, don't ever let anyone tell you that you can't have a child, and that's not going to be able to be part of your career and your pathway. Essentially, yeah, like what Ria said, it's not a problem with you. It'll definitely be a problem with the person that's telling you and the team that's telling you, and it's important that you are very aware of that, and that it can be done, and there's lots of people out there that will tell you the same and support you through that as well.
Great. So I think leading on from the discussion that we just had, I think one of the questions is, what are your strategies for dealing with discrimination and microaggressions? And are these things that you have felt comfortable reporting in the past? Because I think a lot of people do still, unfortunately, have that uncertainty or fear about reporting certain things and how that can affect their career as well.
I guess a big thing to note is that things are changing. The political climate, you know, currently is one of making sure that you are actively anti-racist, and, you know, in the same boat, you know, actively anti-discriminative, because, you know, it's just something that I personally am not okay with. I guess as I've become more senior, and senior as in age, as well as now that I'm a registrar, you know, taking on responsibilities of the welfare of my residents and my interns, was not something that I'd never had to kind of deal with before. It was more kind of looking out for myself, of course, looking out for my patients and my colleagues, but less so than I've found this year as a registrar. And I guess, you know, when you see discrimination, micro-discrimination or overt discrimination as a senior, it's sometimes a lot easier from my point of view to step up and say, like, no, this is not okay. I guess the time that I've struggled with it the most was when I was a medical student, and I was very lucky that the School of Indigenous Studies at my university was really engaged and involved in our medical school. A lot of the lecturers there sat on the board of examiners. They sat within the faculty, so they had the ability to bring it up. But I guess now as a doctor, I've never been really, since being a doctor, someone that will back down. I mean, in certain situations, discrimination is something that I won't back down from. I don't feel I can't find the word. I'm not afraid to bring it up to my seniors. I will, in a respectful way, bring it up to my consultants if I'm not happy about what is said, particularly when it comes to talking about Indigenous patients, because that's, you know, something that I can very easily relate to, and know when things are right and wrong. I think in terms of strategies and making a stand, I mean, everyone's, I mean, it's very individual. Everybody knows when something that's said is not quite right. And I would say that, you know, 100% of people know when it's not right. There's an uncomfortableness about it, and that's when something needs to be said. And, you know, whether you say that to a colleague that might be able to say something on your behalf, I find that going home and writing things down and kind of looking at the different ways in which it could play out, and the message that you want to bring across, and the teaching point that you want to bring across is probably a really great way to kind of start the conversation in your head, and then be able to address that with your team, or with your colleagues, or with your family, or whoever it might be. I guess it's all about having those conversations, really. You just have to start it. And I know that it's hard, and I know that's difficult, but at the end of the day, if I got held back because I stepped up to talk about something that was discrimination, and I was held back for it, then that's not the team that I want to be part of. That's not the career that I want to be part of. Like, you know, my self-worth and my moral code is much more important than, you know, getting ahead.
Great. Does anyone else have anything to add to what Binka has just said, or?
It's Paul. I would just say, Binka, the fact that you can speak up at your stage of your career is fantastic. So when I was at that stage, the power imbalances were just too great. The rigidity of the people who were in control would mean that if you're intimidated from speaking up about anything: racism, sexism, homophobia. And to be honest, I didn't really see anyone do it until I had my boss in Cairns called out a woman for being racist. She said she didn't want to have her cesarean section done by a Chinese doctor. Chinese doctor was actually Korean, but he threw her out of the hospital and said that she wasn't entitled to have care there. That was a pretty extreme thing to do, but it showed me that he would stand up for one of his colleagues. She ended up having to go to a smaller rural hospital to have her baby, and he got in trouble for it. But it was a pretty amazing demonstration of how to stand up for somebody else's rights.
Yeah. Thank you for that. A bit of leading on from that question was another question saying, so how do you weed out people who are genuinely supportive versus people or systems trying to collect diversity like we are Pokemon? So I guess it's a matter of how true people, like, how do you weed out people who are truly for such a cause versus people who may just be superficially saying that they are all for diversity, and their actions may not necessarily reflect their true intentions?
Excellent question. I was about to type a response to that one. So what I've found is that if you are then being prioritized to be the front page on the front page of a pamphlet, if you're being pushed into doing promotional interviews for your institution that in your gut you don't feel comfortable doing. If you find that people are sort of putting you forward for committees and so on, that's when you know that's when you need to question internally the authenticity of the action. So for me at medical school, I learnt very quickly that a handful of us Indigenous students were essentially planned to be used as props for promotion for our medical school. I then stopped doing a lot of that public stuff and started doing things that I felt were more meaningful. So speaking at events like this, talking with classmates and colleagues in tutorial settings, and having conversations and presentations at hospital grand rounds and stuff like that. I found that to be more meaningful than being the poster child of Indigenous health. Because then what happens is I've noticed with a few colleagues is that you're then pigeonholed into or siloed into a specific area. And then people think that just because you're an Indigenous doctor, you're only going to work in Aboriginal communities. And then that's the narrative that people, that organisations and medical schools sort of try to frame. So you just need to, if you notice that you're being put forward for more promotional stuff than what you feel comfortable doing, then that's probably the biggest telltale sign. I don't know, Binka, do you have any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that there are definitely times that there might be times when you're put up for something or someone's mentioned something to you for that they think that might interest you, and if that is something that you're genuinely interested in, then of course you can you put your hand up and say, yeah, I'd love to be a part of that. But that's the difference between if your organization comes to you and says, like, we've got there's this opportunity that we saw and we thought of you, what do you think of this? Is this something that you would be interested in? How can we help you? How can we support you into doing this? Is very different from like, here's our one Indigenous surgeon, here's our one Indigenous medical student, Indigenous student this, or X wherever you're from, or student this, is very different. And I guess I don't know, Justin's probably the same as me. I do get a bit of a gut feeling about these things. You do what, and most people that are kind of, I guess the people that are asking these questions have lived it their whole life as well. And so you do start to have a sixth sense about all of these things. And I think the biggest thing is when someone comes to you and says, like, how can we support you going through this? Is this something that you would be interested in? What are you interested in? How can we support that or make this possible for you, is very different and as much more authentic and genuine. I think also, for me personally, starting at Monash, not at Monash, at Western Health, I don't know whether it's because we have quite a few junior consultants or, consultants that are very junior in the surgical field at the moment. I have two surgical consultants that are quite young, were fellows last year. So yes, very young. And their take on, Aboriginal trainees, and what me being part of their health organisation means is very different from some of the kind of heads of department. And that's much more genuine. And thankfully, a lot of medicine is now becoming that, as we get, waves of more junior consultants coming through, and less of the old school thinking of medicine kind of being weeded out. But yeah, I think if you're asking this question, there will be a gut feeling about whether this is something that you're being taken advantage for, or whether it's genuine and they're trying to support you through something that's going to benefit you, as opposed to just them.
Having walked this path many times, I'll tell you a little story. So one of the first Royal Australasian College of Surgeons meetings I ever went to, this is a good, how long have I been a consultant now? So a good 15 years or so ago, I thought, excellent, I've made it onto this committee. And then I went to the committee meeting, which was one of those big boardroom meetings with a big long oak table where the chair sits at one end. And I was given a seat at the very far end. And it was literally said in this meeting, a big welcome to Ria, who's our new member. It's really good she's here because she ticks the boxes for a woman, a minority, and a younger fellow. So we don't need to ask anyone else to join us. So the tokenism was entirely overt, But as time has gone on and that sort of thing has happened to me repeatedly, I've often thought to myself, right, so is this a position where I can nevertheless make a difference, even though it appears my appointment was tokenistic to start with? And of course, very soon, the chairs of these poor committees would discover that I was an exceedingly noisy wee thing, even though they'd chuck me at the far end of the table. And I suppose what that gave me was just a space to plant some ideas. And I reckon for the first 2 or 3 years, almost everything I said just kind of got glossed over. You'd say, well, what about this? Or maybe we should do this. And everyone would go, oh, yeah, well, here's all the reasons why not. Or that's not really what the focus of this is about. Or maybe when you spend a bit more time in the college, you'll figure out how these things work. That was the sort of things that were said. But you just kind of slowly kind of chip away at it, and just being in the room gave you the opportunity to start making changes. So I would say don't reject these opportunities outright. I mean, like literally, if they just want you to be there to do what I call compulsory activism. So compulsory activism is that extra work that they never pay you for, that you have to do just because of who you are or what you look like. So, if they suddenly want, honestly, I've been asked to do events where it was for, liaison with the Asian communities. And I'm a New Zealander, with very dodgy Cantonese skills. So I don't know what I was in the room for. And the same thing, being a woman in surgery means that somehow there's compulsory motherhood. It's not, will you have kids? It's when are you going to have kids and how are you going to look after them? So that compulsory activism, so compulsory indigenousness, I would think, is probably a similar thing, that you are not allowed to not hold that identity at any given time, whereas non-Indigenous people, of course, get to not have to represent their race, their entire race, all the time. So when it's totally tokenism and you're just there for compulsory activism, then I'd say, no, I won't be your pretty face. But where it gives you an opportunity to actually have yourself heard, then I will consider those positions, because over time that has allowed people to hear my thoughts. And obviously when the Operating with Respect program launched in 2015, apparently it was said in a small room at the office, well, there's that woman on the Gold Coast who's always really noisy about these things. That was apparently what was said, which was how I got asked to join. So I don't mind being the small noisy person in that regard, because I've been able to do quite a lot in that position. Yeah, but do note the time frame. I'm talking over a scale of a decade and a half. But one of the great things about my culture, and actually a lot of cultures, is that we have a great deal of patience. you know, the ills that we're correcting can go back 100, 200 years. You know, it's like, do I have time to figure this one out and keep working at it? Absolutely, I do. That's paying respects to my ancestors.
100%, 100% agree. So patience and resilience is something that is sort of bred amongst us native folk these days. And so you think about the hardships that our people have had to endure over the course of colonization. And I'm often humbled because I think about where I am now. Like, I'm a vascular surgery registrar in a quaternary metropolitan centre, and literally just 2 generations ago, like, my family were fishermen, and that was all we were ever going to be. And my nan and my aunties all grew up, and all they knew was how to cook, clean, and look after children for white people, and they were only going to be domestics. And so in 2 generations, we've now produced an Aboriginal doctor in our family. Means a lot. And so the resilience that all the people before us have had to go through provides us with a sense of duty for what we have to do in our roles now. So as Indigenous doctors, I find that it's not just having to be a good clinician that we have to do. Like, that's bread and butter stuff. We have to do that. But we also have a duty to try and improve outcomes for our people as well, which I think as you become more senior, like what Ria was saying, as you become more senior, you become more influential, and then your sphere of influence is then enough that you can create, like what Ria usually does, #culture change. Like, that's when you change a culture, is when people like us finally start to develop our skills clinically and professionally to be in positions of influence, and then make it easier for the next person coming along.
I was just going to say, with that idea, operate with respect, occasionally I will have unsatisfactory interactions with surgeons who are, I'm not a surgeon, I'm an obstetrician gynecologist, but we might have a disagreement, or it's an access to theatre problem. If somebody doesn't behave well, I'll use the #operate with respect, and they get it. They back off like a mile and rethink and apologise. So I think that idea is getting through.
I guess that's a great segue to one of the questions, which is, what role do you think social media, particularly Twitter, has on promoting surgery to medical students or junior doctors from non-traditional backgrounds?
I think this question is directed.
I think we've lost Justin.
I think Justin.
Well, I can complete his sentence. This question is directed at Ria.
Hey, I only joined Twitter 18 months ago. You've been on longer than I have.
Have I?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. But you've got that blue star, so you're the empress of Twitter. So it's your question.
Yes, I somehow got verified. I was thinking though, because Neela, who hasn't been able to join us today, and I presume that's because of surgical, because we're all surgeons and things happen, so that's probably why Neela isn't here. But I was just thinking, out of all the speakers on today, the one person we do need to get onto Twitter is Binka. Binka, you have to come join us on Twitter. It's fun, I promise you. Justin and I will talk about dumplings. And oh my God, Paul's food posts, you just can't cook anymore after that, out of shame, because you can never measure up to Paul's cooking.
I was going to say that I wouldn't be able to answer the question about Twitter because I don't have it and I've never been on it. Multiple people have told me that I need to be on Twitter, so perhaps I shall join.
Well, look, Calvin Kong's on Twitter. That's all you need to know. Yeah. Justin, you're back though. What were you going to say before?
What was I going to say before? I was saying that you should answer this question first, Ria. I think the whole panel agrees. Like, I was lining you up. I was seeking you to answer this question first.
Well, the thing was,
because you asked.
Yeah, I was told to get on Twitter. I mean, I wasn't going to get on Twitter, and then two things happened. I started my PhD, and the lovely Deborah Nestel, who, you know, Paul and I know well, I mean, she's inspired an entire generation of surgical educators, but she said, you should really get on Twitter because there's a lot of, you know, surgical educators there, and they'll give you little ideas and snippets that will be really useful for your thesis. So that was one reason. So I got on for academic reasons. But then the College of Surgeons, actually, when you take up leadership positions like chair committees, they actually, the comms department will actually come to you and say, would you like us to set you up with a profile, because it's quite good for us to have, you know, leaders out there who can sell the, you know, the kind of be the thought leaders, and they will actually from time to time feed you, you know, little snippets that you can post or tell you what the official hashtags are. So Operate With Respect is not my hashtag. Operate With Respect is actually from the College of Surgeons. And then, of course, you start picking up hashtags from other people. So things like Hammer It Out is an orthopedic culture change hashtag that comes to us from the UK. Same with Me Too Healthcare, which is about sexual harassment. So you start to get a little bit more skilled on social media, constructing your post to remember to stick the hashtags on and tag in the important people who can retweet things. I mean, we're just little minnows, all of us. I think I'm up to about 6,000 followers or something, which in Australasia is you know, pretty solid. But you have a look at some of the American commentators and you know, 150,000 followers or something crazy is just amazing. So if you can get them to retweet something that you've tweeted by tagging them, and then you can magnify your message much more. Having said that, you know, although there's a fair bit of, you know, promulgating the official lines about Operate With Respect and giving people links to policies, or the new 10th competency, which is cultural competency, regardless of all that, I think 80% of my posting is just what we would, sorry, I'm going to swear now, shit posting, you know, and it's just us having banter about whatever comes up. You know, Paul and I had a really lovely tweet about pie birds, which I'd never known about before, which are these little ceramic things that keep your pie from collapsing. You know, we've had dumpling tweets. We've had lots of pun tweets. There's a lot of punning that goes on. And it's just, you just get to know people outside of your institution, and it is a real source of strength when you're going through hard times. Pie birds. Look, Paul's got pie birds for us. Yeah. So, but they are a real source of strength. You know, I know that if I've had a really crap day and 2 or 3 colleagues have, you know, piled on and made me feel terrible about something, you know, I can have a private Twitter chat with someone else that makes me feel immediately better, because they're not in my work unit and they can give me perspective and a bit of a cheer up so that I know I'm going in the right direction. And so, you know, the Twitter tribe, or what in the feminist area it's called the raft of otters, because apparently female otters all hold hands with each other to make rafts, and they float through like enormous sea storms this way and survive that way. Anyway, so this tribe, or your raft of otters, can be an incredible network for you to keep you motivated and cheered up, and stop you from getting too despondent when you have a crappy day. Yeah, Paul?
Yeah, I think I love having a joke and playing around, because I think one of the things I've learned is work is stressful, and I always try and cheer people up if I sense they're down or tense, and we joke around a bit at work sometimes at the handover. If you start off the day with a lighter mood, I think it helps you get through the day. So Twitter or Facebook are really good for that. I'd also be wary, because it's very easy to get caught into arguments, wanting to have the last word, getting political. I've been told off from my workplace for being too partisan in my politics. The marriage equality, social media issues were horrible, really. And then also I think there can be an element of narcissism in Twitter, not for anybody here, but you know, the biggest person with the biggest following in the world is the biggest narcissist in the world, and we all know who that is. But as long as it's not about you, I think if it's about sharing ideas and knowledge and support and having fun, then I think it works really well.
Thanks so much for sharing your insight into social media. The next question we've got is, how did you go about seeking support or mentorship during your own training when you felt like you didn't belong? And what would your advice be for medical students seeking mentors?
I think the only thing I would say is they don't have to be congruent. You know, just because I'm a woman Asian surgeon doesn't mean I have to be looking for women surgeons or Asian surgeons. I think my biggest supporters have actually been white men. And conversely, you know, there are some women surgeons who are just frankly unsupportive of other women surgeons. They rather famously eat their own young, as we say. So you don't have to find congruent surgeons. What you're looking for is people who have your best interests at heart and aren't just saying it in words, but doing it in actions. So there's a very famous slide in Feminists in hashtag I Look Like a Surgeon, which is about women in surgery. It's a very famous slide that basically says, you know, promote her, cite her, credit her, you know, nominate her, you know, award her, all that sort of thing. And it's just, it's that thought that it's not just being a cheer squad, but actually doing concrete things to lift people up. Of course, poor old Justin has borne the brunt of this as I've gone, Justin, you are now speaking at this event.
That's okay. I'm used to it now.
Yeah, but it's those concrete things. I mean, obviously Justin has the right to turn me down, but it's just, you know, there are getting back to our earlier comments about when people are genuine, there are a lot of people who like to make a big show of supporting women or Indigenous or, you know, LGBT or whatever. They'll wear the rainbow lanyard, but when it comes to it, they're not willing to speak up or put themselves in harm's way or actually nominate people to speak. And also there's that scenario of speaking on behalf of, which Justin and I have had a few conversations about. So because of the lack of Indigenous surgeons, quite often the person speaking about Indigenous issues in the college is someone who's not Indigenous. And to some degree that was unavoidable until recently, but now that there actually are Indigenous people, they are, you know, there are too many people speaking on behalf of Indigenous people. And I know that feeling from back when, you know, quite often the men would tell us what was best for the women in surgery. Same feeling, you know, you're thinking, well, how would they know, you know, and why are we being told what's best for us? It was just a very patronizing sort of approach. Yeah. Binka and Justin, your thoughts?
So in a similar presentation that Ria and I were involved in earlier this year, I, in preparation for it and just recently in my surgical research, the amount of surgical research published about Aboriginal people by non-Indigenous surgeons is outstanding. Like and back to the days where decisions were made about our people without consultation with our people. And so
I think it's
I'm
just
not sure what happened there. I don't know if Justin can still hear us, but I guess I'll let him finish when he comes back. But yeah, I guess it's similarly to Ria. My you know, some of my biggest supporters are non-Indigenous men. And I guess it's difficult to have you know, Indigenous surgical supporters that are senior to you, because a lot of the other Indigenous surgical doctors are of similar level as me, or medical students. So a lot of my kind of surgical mentors and supporters are non-Indigenous. I'm very lucky to have Kelvin, of course, but given kind of he's like just one of I probably have 3 main supporters, and 2 of them are Caucasian men, and then it's Kelvin, and I don't actually have many female supporters, but like Ria said, there are quite a few female surgeons who like to eat their young, but less and less. I've been very fortunate that I haven't actually kind of come across any of people like that. I don't know if Justin is back. It says that he's kind of not on. It looks frozen, but he's.
Am I here?
Oh yeah. Do you want to continue going? Because
this internet here is killing me. Because I felt like I was on a really good roll, and then I've just completely lost my chain of thought. So, in Indigenous health surgical research, there's a lot of very, very patronising research or paternalistic research that's been published. And when you, and this is across all specialties, and cardiothoracics are particularly notorious for it. That particular specialty has been flagged on my radar. When you look at it, the research, they have decided just to do a post hoc analysis of patients retrospectively, of patients who have identified as Indigenous when they presented to hospitals. And all it really is a very small demographic review, essentially. And so people are making sweeping claims about the outcomes for Indigenous patients based on an N of 18, 18 patients, presented for redo valve surgery was one thing. And so people are then categorizing these papers as an Indigenous health paper, and then making sweeping claims saying, Indigenous disadvantage, this is XYZ in cardiothoracic surgical outcomes, because these 18 people didn't come back to their follow-up, and then make all of these use all of these amazing adjectives like shockingly different health outcomes, what else? There's all these different quotes that I've written down for a paper that I'm writing, where it's the outcomes are just shocking, and then the narrative of the Aboriginal patient not coming to follow up and being non-compliant. There's just this narrative in surgical research that really for us, I can't speak for Binka, but for me, coming up as a young junior surgical registrar, it's really disheartening. So yeah, that was one thing. There's a lot of stuff in Indigenous health research that is sort of spoken about, but not really done correctly.
Yeah. Justin and I trade little screenshots of terrible things we've seen. The language is really quite awful, and the good way to check that is to replace Indigenous with white and see whether it still reads all right. And so, things phrases we must show more compassion to our Indigenous patients. And you're just sort of what's this our? They don't belong to you. And the possessive is particularly, the idea that, to use a possessive pronoun about another race is particularly damaging when, the stolen generation is just such a recent memory. It's like, what do you mean our Indigenous anything, our Indigenous brothers and sisters? It's like, God, no. Can you imagine if an Indigenous man had written in a paper as a first author, we must have great compassion to our white, patients, it would just not go down. There would be an absolute outroar. So, you turn it around and you think, oh, ugly. Anyway, so Justin and I trade screenshots of terrible things we've seen, and where it's possible, of course, I take the opportunity to provide private feedback to the authors if they're in the surgical field. Just to make people aware of it in a respectful way. Of course, being the chair of operating with respect, it's not to humiliate them or hang them up on a string, but just to make them aware that that sort of language is not acceptable anymore. Yeah, I mean, that gets back to a question I saw earlier about, there's been no visible repercussion for reports of bullying and stuff. And it's sort of like, I know it's very hard. There is, it's not often very public. So the example that was quoted about Yumiko, and of course Yumiko's on Twitter too, and there's a lot of correspondence, we chat amongst ourselves about that too, but they were saying, what's going to happen to the people who put her through all those terrible experiences? Nothing's happened to them. Let me assure you that things have happened. Changes have been made to that training position, and lots of things have been tightened up in terms of the working conditions. But this is not a vendetta. It sometimes seems that when people keep calling for, what's going to happen, why are there no repercussions, that they almost seem to want a senior surgeon to be hung, drawn and quartered in public. And so there's this idea that operate with respect extends to everyone, that we, much as the senior to junior victimization has to be gotten rid of, that it's not fair for us to allow that to happen the other way either. So I pushed back quite strongly about things like calling people dicks, bastards, boomers, that okay boomer thing, I don't like it. Dinosaurs, and what we call the subtweets. So subtweets are when people won't refer to you directly, but they will tweet about you as though you're not there. And it's the kind of like the Twitter equivalent of being in a party and no one will talk to you. People will say, oh, did anyone see, a paper published in prominent journal to do with such and such specialty, and doesn't he realize he should retire already? He's such a dinosaur. Now, no names have been named and the journal has been named, but everyone knows who you're talking about. And that person is also on Twitter themselves and will see that tweet about themselves. It's very hurtful. So I am, I can't seem to win. People will say, why are you being so soft about juniors? You're going to encourage snowflakes to train in surgery. So that's from my senior colleagues, but from the junior colleagues, people will say, why aren't you doing more about bullying in surgery? Why aren't you calling these people out? And so I feel like I can't win, but the essential thing is respect is a multi-way thing. It's not just one way. It's not just something we're asking of the seniors towards the juniors. It's something that we are also asking from the juniors towards the seniors.
Could I just add, Ria, that things are changing. So when I went through university in the early 80s, the bullying started from day one and it was present every single day. I asked my current at Melbourne Uni MD3 students, third year out of fourth year course, they could think of one medical specialist, not in surgery, who was a bully during their entire 2 years at the hospital. Had not been bullied by anyone except that person, and that person was they reported it, and their contract was terminated. So you're right, there is action, and you will be listened to if you do raise it. And I think I've been around for a very long time now, and it's changed a lot, and it needs to continue to change, but it is changing.
Can I just add, I think that's that the respect on every level of surgery, I think is really important. For a lot of years, there have been people that know who the bullies are, and there's been a lot of kind of similarly to consultants talking within units so that everybody knows which juniors may be a little bit behind and things like that. Juniors talk, and so everybody is aware of who the bullies are, but nobody says anything. And I think, on I guess kind of a bit of a fast stretch, but on some level that's disrespectful, and people just need to speak up. And I guess there has been one surgeon that I've heard of, from my seniors and fellows, that in recent years has been quite unsupportive and borderline bullying, particularly to certain people over others. And finally people stood up and said, this has been going on for a while, and the executives and heads of departments took that on. And while the surgeon didn't lose their job, which I didn't think that was necessary, large changes have been made. It's been made a very obvious teaching point, and now the units run very differently, and there's no bullying anymore, and it's something that person's kind of got a chance to grow personally and professionally. And I think that people have to be given that opportunity. Obviously, if you have repeat offenders despite the attempts to change behaviours, I think obviously that's when things need to be terminated and things like that. But from a higher up level, and juniors as well, because we're all human, and there's human error, and we should be able to take the constructive criticism on and change our behaviours. And similarly, if you're going through medical school and you get told that you're falling behind in whatever area, and then you get given the chance to repeat the year, or step up and work harder, but if no one tells someone that, then they don't get the opportunity to change.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about accepting that none of us is completely an angel, and no one is completely a devil either. I will freely admit that I have crappy days where I behave disrespectfully myself, and that's being, the chair of the supposed Operate with Respect committee. But it's the ability to be humble enough to go back and apologise and learn to do better. But the converse is true, even though there may be inveterate bullies, they do have to be given the opportunity to change. Often they will be quite stunned when you tell them how they come across. They have not had anyone tell them out front that that's how they come across. Or they may still ascribe to outdated beliefs, such as that bullying improves learning. That's quite a common belief. And so you have to kind of turn up and go, well, no, there's about 20 years of educational research that disproves that now. And I appreciate that's how you were trained, with the same mistaken belief, but we know better now, so can we please reflect on that and change? There are people who have literally had their fellowship stripped or being asked to retire because of persistent bullying. That goes on in the background, and I certainly won't name names. But just to say, there is a kind of, sequential sanction process where we will deal with this, but not in a public way. So I know that, like I said, sometimes it feels like people are calling for a public, hanging just about, what's been happening in this unit, why isn't it splashed on the papers?
The next question is, have there been times when you have felt your diversity was an asset? What are the examples?
Sorry, can you just repeat that one again?
People, even though it might have been bad.
Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Ria, sorry, you cut out for a moment as well.
Oh, right. Has it improved now, though?
Yeah, it has. It has.
Yeah. So just to say, no one's ever completely a devil. Their bullying behaviours may relate to their teaching or to their professional relationships, but nevertheless, if they've had a career in surgery, they will still have contributed to, the care of many patients, possibly some research, the training of many juniors, the formation of units, all that sort of thing. So it's trying to keep the good that they contribute to surgery while getting rid of the bad. And everyone deserves at least some grace. But I agree with Binka that, if they're given several opportunities to improve and chances at grace and they don't improve, then that's the time to escalate it to us. And there is a sequential sanction pathway within the college that we can follow. Yeah, it does take time. The pathways, where we have taken significant sanctions against people, it does take 2 or 3 years, because change is not fast. It's not easy for someone to suddenly just stop bullying. It's actually a behavior change project, and all of us know how hard behavior change is. So the cycles of reviewing them and seeing how they're going kind of go in 6 to 12 month rotations. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks so much for that. Yeah, so the next question is, have there been times when you have felt your diversity was an asset?
Could I answer that one? I just feel quite strongly, because I'm gay. I growing up, I didn't feel I fit in the lower socioeconomic suburb that I grew up in, and the neighbourhood I grew up in, I didn't fit. I think that gave me, as I grew up, an empathy towards people who didn't fit in, and I feel much more connected to women than I do men, just in terms of enjoying their company or conversations, empathy for their situation. I think that's really helped me in my specialty, and it's also for patients and also for female trainees, because I think I've been lucky enough that I've developed really good trusting relationship with trainees and been influential in their careers. So I think my point of difference, if you like to call it that, has been really beneficial in my career.
I 100% agree. So I've lost count of how many times where patients have recognised me as an Indigenous person, and the sort of encouragement that patients have given me has been quite touching, and also it's quite motivating to, I'm trying to think of the right word, but people seem to have a great sense of pride when they see an Indigenous surgical registrar attending to them. And that's something that I've witnessed, especially recently, being at North Shore Hospital, which is in a very affluent area of Sydney's North Shore. I was really expecting to get mixed responses from patients, but in the last little while, I felt so empowered that, and given a lot of the current issues that have been highlighted in society with Black Lives Matter and things like that, I've felt the need to have some cultural empowerment in the workplace. And so I ordered myself some Indigenous designed scrub caps, and a scrub cap with the Aboriginal flag on it and my name and my specialty. And so seeing the genuine sort of pride and joy in people's faces when they see that as I'm walking through the corridor has been priceless. And so I feel like that has added a depth of a new layer to the therapeutic relationships that I have with patients. And especially like vascular surgery, where you have patients who have such chronic illness, who are always coming back with issues. It's a really good it's a really good asset to have.
Similarly, I think for me, I wear Indigenous scrub caps every day, and I think for me. I am very outspoken in my Aboriginality, and so particularly in the time of COVID and having to wear face shields and face masks, and so like people just see this much of me, and a lot of people make the assumption that I'm not Indigenous because they see a brown female this much in surgery and assume that I'm not Indigenous. So wearing my scrub cap and I have like an Aboriginal flag sticker on my badge, and you know, it's always a talking point. People often ask where I'm from, and then ask me if I'm Aboriginal because of my scrub cap, and you know, things. Mostly it's positive, and certainly it's positive when I have patients who are Indigenous, because I think. You know, that's why I got into medicine. That's why I wanted to be a doctor. And I think while we're all wearing, you know, Aboriginal people talk about this like black dar, where you can very easily identify other Aboriginal people, regardless of, you know, how dark or fair they are. When you're wearing a face mask and face shield, it's difficult. And so while I can identify that my patients may be Aboriginal, they can't often identify in me. And so wearing something that identifies me kind of on an outside is important for me as a doctor, but also I think it's important for my patients as well.
I 100% agree. So there's definitely a thing. It's definitely a thing. Over here, I call it the Indigidar as well. So I'm able to spot another Aboriginal person, like regardless of the fairness of their skin or anything like that. And so being able to engage a patient on that cultural level is like just so empowering on so many levels for both of us. And I think that any form of otherness, whether that be female, LGBTQ, Indigenous, anything like that, I think that it just adds so much more to the therapeutic relationship. And I feel like, and there's research around it, and I'm sure Ria can point to where that evidence is, but there's research that shows if you have representation of the community in the workforce, then people are going to have better outcomes. And that's one thing that I've definitely seen as well.
Yep. So there's evidence from cardiology that Black patients who have Black physicians looking after them have better outcomes. Because it's more personally meaningful. So they're more likely to agree to invasive procedures, they're more likely to fill their scripts and be compliant with medication, because it is more meaningful for them to have someone from your own mob say, you know, this is important to me as a doctor that you do well. You know, there is that feeling, whereas for, you know, the perception is that non-Indigenous physicians may not understand or are doing it in a patronizing way. You know, you must take this medication because I told you. Whereas someone from your own mob saying, I'd like you to take this medication because I care and I want you to do well, is much more meaningful. So that's why we get better outcomes. And it's really important that we have that diversity available to our patients. So patients, you know, who are looking for that sort of diversity currently have very little choice. So, you know, if you are looking specifically for a female surgeon, you've got your choice of the 13% of the surgical fellowship that is currently women. Otherwise, it's 87% male. So, and that's particularly important in, you know, gynecological surgery or breast surgery, you know, those sorts of things that are very sort of private and personal. That's not to say that we should have a 100% female workforce in those areas. You know, the whole thing is that people themselves are diverse, so you can't make broad sweeping generalizations about what they would like. You just have to provide a workforce that is as diverse as possible so they can choose. I mean, looking forward, I would dearly love to have some of the disabilities represented. You know, I mean, just people who can sign language, for example. You know, if you had a hearing impaired surgeon, you know, the patients I've treated who have hearing impairments say that there's that moment when they're being put to sleep. You know, the anesthesia is being induced, they're flat on their backs with their arms strapped out on two boards at 90 degrees to the table. And they can see, they can't see people's mouths moving because everyone's wearing a mask. All they can see is the bright lights and lots of people moving. And in that moment, they told me, they feel like they're being crucified. They feel like they're bloody Jesus on a cross, you know, just lying there under the bright lights. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be amazing if you had someone who had the skills who could sign to you as you were going to sleep, and tell you what was going on and who was going to touch you on your head and what was being, connected, and how your arm was going to feel as the propofol goes in. And, like, we don't have that experience available to our patients at the moment. And I would dearly like for that sort of thing to be included. And same thing for transgender patients. We have very little in the way of surgery for surgeons who have personal lived experience of what it's like to go through gender affirmation surgery. So, I mean, these ideas are still pretty radical in the halls of the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, but, just like the ideas about women and about Indigenous surgeons, if I keep bleating on about these in various forums, I'm sure that the ideas will sink in and maybe bear fruit in time.
When I wanted to pursue ENT surgery, I started learning Auslan because I thought, yeah, absolutely, if I want to be an ENT surgeon, I'm going to have patients that are going to be deaf and only sign. So, but now that I've not continued on the ENT route, I've stopped. But regardless of what area you're in, I mean, you're going to have people that are deaf and female and male, and and neither. And it's, I guess it's really important, I think, regardless of, and I mean, because I can only come from an Indigenous perspective, but definitely at Western, having patients that come in that only speak, we get a lot of people that speak Vietnamese, and a lot of the junior doctors also speak Vietnamese, and there is a very distinct change in a patient when you get a doctor that speaks the same language as you and is from the same background as you. And while a lot of Indigenous language is lost, and while I'm from the north of Western Australia, it's still, I guess, the collective Indigenous community across Australia is so strong and so connected. And I think that you recognize that that's your countrymen, that's your people. So it's really nice, and it's definitely important. And but yeah, I think if we can, it'd be really great to see kind of things brought into RACs, and I guess we've made lots of changes, but kind of it's exciting, I guess, to see what the future could bring in the next couple of years in terms of diversity, ongoing diversity.
Yeah, I don't think it's for lack of goodwill. I think it's just that you have all the same voices in the room. So I found when I say these things, it's not that people aren't willing to help, it's just that they've never thought about it before. I mean, rather astoundingly, I mean, Paul and I had a conversation about this, but rather astoundingly, I had a registrar who identifies, he is gay, and he was looking for a gay surgical mentor. And everyone I ask is recommending the same person, because it's a bit like Calvin Kong, for Indigenous, they're so underrepresented that everyone can only think of one surgeon who's openly gay. And yet, there's something very wrong with that picture, knowing what the population percentage of homosexuality is. You're like, well, there's either got to be more within our surgical fellowship, because there's 7,000 surgeons across Australia and New Zealand, or there really is just that one surgeon who is gay, which means that we're heavily underrepresented compared to the general population, which must speak to some really awful systemic bias, So neither of those two truths or possibilities is very palatable. It's like either they're there and they're not willing to speak up or identify themselves, or they're not there at all. I don't really care which truth it is, but we've got to do something about it. So yeah, and I'm still stuck for who I'm going to find to mentor this registrar who asked for help. Yeah. Anyways.
One thing I was just going to add too, like I guess a bit of a story time, is while it doesn't just in diversity doesn't just increase your patients' positive experience within hospitals, it also kind of builds it within your team as well. When I was a medical student in my 5th year at UWA, we get to do a rural year and go to a rural town within Western Australia for 12 months. And I was really lucky to go home. I got to go back to Derby for 12 months. And during our 5th year, we do obstetrics and gynecology. And my family and where I'm from, and I think in a lot of Indigenous language groups and communities, childbirth is very much a women's business. It's, men are not involved, and not for lack of want. And while I think, a lot of Indigenous men have kind of taken on, the mainstream Australia's expectation that men are present during birth now, in the Kimberley, it's very much not like that still. And I was at the birth of a baby, and during labour, the dad was just sitting outside of the hospital. And then the nurses kept making these comments about how they were like, I don't really understand why he's not coming in, and it's, that seems really weird, and why is the mother here and he's not here? And I was just in this position where I got to kind of give a little bit of teaching and say, well, actually, it's not men's business. But then on the other part of that is that that this mother-in-law, son-in-law relationship in where I'm from is a very taboo relationship, and they don't speak, and they often are not in the same room together. And so I was able to also, explain that after the baby's born, that while the grandmother is there, the father will likely not be, and vice versa. Not because they don't get along or because they can't, it's just that that's the relationship that they have. And it was strange that it was the first time that the nurses were hearing this when they live and work in Derby, which is, 80% Indigenous population that have this cultural obligation and rule. But so, and they were just like, wow, we had no idea, that's really great. And they were able to kind of reflect on all of the other births that they've been a part of, that this was an aspect of. And so obviously it helps patients, but helps the other workers, and then I guess in turn helps patient satisfaction and care as well.
I'm really interested to hear that, because I worked in cairns, for 20 years, and this is going back almost 30 years. And I don't know whether it's just a difference between Queensland and Western Australia, but all the midwives and the doctors knew that because there was cultural training. It just astonishes me that midwives didn't know, unless they were on short-term rotations. But that's really sad that there's not enough importance placed on that to train the staff.
I was also really surprised because the community that I grew up on, Mowanjum community, is 10 k's out of town, and there's another one down at Pandanus Park which is 60 k's, and all the kids go to school in Derby and are born up there. And throughout all of the 80s and 90s, most children in the Kimberley were born in Derby as the regional hospital. And I guess, of course there's going to be locum nurses that come up and locum staff that come up. But for the most part, a lot of the staff at Derby Hospital are permanent and have been there for a very long time. And it was strange. And that was kind of the first time that they were hearing it. Whether there was an element of that they'd heard it before, but it never had been explained, could have been part of it. But I found it weird as well.
Thanks so much for sharing that. That was such an awesome story. That was incredible.
Thanks so much for sharing. We do have a few questions about mentorship that comes through. So another one is, with respect to finding mentors, would it be normal to reach out to doctors or someone you haven't met before? Because I know some people are unsure how to start a mentee-mentor relationship, and just what is acceptable to ask or talk about in the initial email or Twitter?
Anything you like, as long as it's polite and respectful. So So, you know, people quite often ping me sight unseen on Twitter and say, you know, do you mind if I use you as a mentor and ask you some questions? So, and that's fine. Please don't be offended if the person you've approached says something like, I haven't got capacity for that right now, or can you come and ask me again in 6 months, you know? So the thing about being underrepresented, and I think all of us in the room will know this feeling, is that the work required, the additional emotional labor of being an advocate for that particular aspect of diversity falls on a very small number of people. And it's on top of, you know, just being a doctor and training into surgery and all the other things you've got to master. So, you know, for instance, the College of Surgeons decided that we were going to aim for 40% representation across all our boards and committees. And it's like, but we've only got 13% women in the whole fellowship. So you're stretching that 13% out, you know, across all your boards and committees, which just means that I'm on an insane number of boards and committees, right? And the same thing will, you know, like poor old Kelvin Kong, you know, bless his little cotton socks, he is amazing, you know, utterly astounding. His work rate is amazing, but he has to have time for himself and his family and to just do his actual normal daily job, because it's just amazing being a surgeon. So, you know, there are times where people say, oh, you know, Calvin says he's too busy. And I'm like, well, you know, you don't be offended by that. You know, be polite and ask respectfully, but sometimes we just don't have the capacity.
Also, could I just add, I've had some really fruitful mentor relationships that have matured over the years and mean a great deal to me, but I've also had some unsatisfactory ones. And don't contact somebody with the purpose of, I guess, using them. You want it to go in both directions. And I was asked to join a formal mentoring program from the AMA, and I got matched with someone who wanted to get onto the ONG program. And as soon as this person did, they dropped me like a hot potato, because they got matched to a different hospital when they got onto the training program. I was of no use to them anymore, so they just stopped. And so if there's a natural affinity and both of you care about that relationship, it's not a one-way street. I think it has to be emotionally and intellectually satisfying and rewarding for both sides. So don't reach out to somebody just with the intention of getting onto a training program or in a transactional way. It's got to be meaningful, I think. What do you think about that, Rio?
Yeah, no, I'd say that the people who are easy to mentor are super easy to mentor, because they're making their own way. They just need you for some guidance. And in turn, you know, I do things like, you know, shove them up for speaking positions and things like that. So it's a two-way thing, but it's just a joy and a delight, because every time you see them, they're moving forward. Whereas some mentees are very demanding of your time, but they're expecting work from you. You know, they're expecting you to do something for them. And those are very unsatisfactory and hard work. You know, I sometimes feel like they're asking you to pave their road with gold, you know, which is not really the way it works. So yeah, no, I totally agree. You know, if you are going to approach someone as a mentor, it's not so much, you know, what can they do for me? You're not going to use them as a stepping stone or step on them. You're wanting them just to kind of be your background cheer squad and to help open doors for you and to give you some guidance about what to do and where to go to navigate for you. Yeah. Would be really interested to hear the views of Justin and Binka, because both of you have spoken about mentors and how you find them. Justin, as in...
I did, there was a few questions about mentoring on the chat. I've answered one of them kind of particularly about Indigenous mentors. Well, I've partly answered it. So I guess my mentoring kind of journey is in like mentee, finding a mentor journey, started in medical school. The medical school that I went to was really proactive in making sure that students were linked with a doctor. Majority of the time, GP, and I was so fortunate to be linked with a mentor, Dr. Catherine Brooker, and she works kind of within the community in Fremantle, but also with the Fremantle Street Doctor, and she is the associate member of the Australian Indigenous Doctors Association, and is a huge advocate for women's rights and Indigenous rights and minority rights. And so like our pairing was just like the best. And then I have kind of accumulated kind of surgical mentors through my training as a resident, and now as a registrar as well. I was really lucky that one of my friends' dads is a orthopedic surgeon, and while he's not in the field that I want to go into at all, which he's aware of, that's a really great mentoring relationship too, because I did some elective time with him, but I only worked with him for maybe 6 weeks, and the relationship that we have is very much that I'm his daughter's friend, and so we're outside of work mentor mentee, and then kind of going through as a resident, I guess I've always really been kind of interested in having mentors from areas that I'm not aspiring to. I think that everybody brings very different experiences and information and wealth to kind of the relationship you have, and that's really important. And so yeah, but most of the doctors that I have now been fortunate enough to have as mentors, I've got from working. One of which is in the area that I want to be in. Mr. Michael Nightingale, he's a paediatric surgeon at the Royal Children's Hospital, and he's from New Zealand, and he's very interested in accumulation of Māori surgeons as well as Indigenous Aboriginal surgeons as well, and particularly within paediatric surgery, but also just within the surgical field itself. And then I think I've never worked with Kelvin, but also just he's been a great friend and mentor through the Australian Indigenous Doctors Association, and I've been kind of very fortunate to have him as a contact as well. But actually, I, from a mentoring point of view, I talk mostly to Michael, and then Kelvin and I kind of touch base more friendly than anything else, because yeah, like you said, Ria, he's very busy, and people who are within your minority within surgery often have a lot of responsibility in mentoring and research and committees and examinations, and so being mindful of that. In terms of advice on how to get someone to be your mentor, I think there's a few things to think about. One, you need to be able to get along with them. And I think also there should be kind of I guess a level of, one, you should be able to get along with them, but also be able to have a relationship where they can push you and tell you when you're maybe being a little bit slack, and need to kind of pick up the pace a bit and be a little bit more structured in some of the things that you're doing. And whether you have multiple mentors, of which one person does more of that kind of role and people are more of a friend role and kind of a work-life balance role, is really important too. And I've been really fortunate that I've kind of found those people. I think sometimes, yeah, you just have to ask and say, you know, hey, I've really enjoyed working with you. I feel like you bring a lot of experience that I'm looking at kind of gaining, and I'd really love to kind of be in touch. And sometimes it just starts from being friends and staying in touch outside of a term that you've done or outside of the role that you've done as a resident or a registrar. And then later on, as you become more familiar with the person, you know, you're able to say like, hey, actually, I'd really love for us to kind of take this to the next level, and you be a mentor of mine. I think for me, a lot of those relationships have just fallen into place, that they've just kind of developed progressively into them being mentors without me really saying, you're now my mentor. Although most of the time I've said like, you're my mentor now, thanks. But yeah, that comes from having a good relationship as the foundation. But yeah, you just have to ask and be prepared for people not to have the time to do it. But I think you'll know as well, if you've started from a place of friendship and you can get along with them and talk to them, you'll know that, you know, they've got the time, and that you have you know, you feel comfortable enough to say like, you know, could you be my mentor now?
It's hilarious. I often joke saying that it feels like you're asking someone out on a date. Like that's how it feels. And it's like you slowly work up to it. So you're working with this person for a little while, and you got to see if there's chemistry there first. And then once you get along and you then work out the dynamics of the relationship, then you ask them officially to be your mentor. Like it's quite funny. Like I remember going through those same sort of emotions when I was a first year med student. I did a week-long placement with Emily Granger, who's a female cardiothoracic surgeon in Sydney, and transplant surgeon, just an incredible human being. And again, very busy, but also values training and education and mentorship. And I remember I had that experience. I did 2 weeks with her, and then like the banter's good, you get on well, sits down and tells you what hoops you need to jump through, what you need to do to progress. And then once you sort of get that going, then I formalized it. I was like, Dr. Granger, like, can we keep in touch after this? And like, will you be my mentor, sort of thing? Like it's quite awkward, but it's quite funny. But you do have to, I feel like you do have to formally ask, because otherwise there's just this, like, it just becomes awkward then. Like you then don't really know. Like it's exactly like, I joke about it all the time, but it's exactly like dating. Like it feels like that sometimes. With regards to what Paul said, I definitely think that it's a two-way street. I'm mindful of the time, but I definitely think that it is a two-way street. There are mentors in orthopedics that I had when I initially wanted to do orthopedics and when I initially wanted to do cardiothoracics. And, you know, even though I've now like decided on vascular surgery, I still have really close relationships with those people, and those people still push me to be the best possible registrar that I could be. And the best examples of that was before I sat my GSSE last year and got through that. I remember all of my mentors consistently pushing me and telling me that, you know, like, you have to show these people that an Aboriginal person can do this and pass this exam first go. And so the way it was put to me, then you sort of think that it's a lot of pressure, but really it wasn't. But they would say, failing's not an option, Justin. Like, put your head down, like, let's get this done. And then when I did a couple of practice exams, that would look at like which areas that I was weak in. And then I'll never forget, there was one section on neoplasia that I just absolutely tanked, and no one said anything. We all just sort of looked at each other, and then I opened up the pathology book and started reading Robbins again. Like, it was like, it's a good, you have to have someone that's honest and that will push you, and that's not scared to tell you when you're being pig-headed, being arrogant, and to pull you into line. and give you feedback. And you also need someone who will also enable you to be the best possible surgeon, doctor that you can be, both professionally and personally. So I find that a lot of my mentors, I have not a super personal relationship, but there is a level of personal, interpersonal sort of relationships that I have with these people, where some of them I actually call auntie and uncle. There's two people who I actually call auntie and uncle, who essentially treat me like a surrogate child as well. And so, yeah, you have to have that sort of level of professional and personal sort of interaction.
Just really quickly, I know that there's the people might have left, but if you're in a position where you've finished medical school and you still don't have a mentor, don't worry. Like, there's time. Everybody's 100%. Been in a situation where, maybe Justin and I are talking about our great relationships with our mentors that we've had for a long time. But if you haven't, that's okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, the matching of it is really important. And so we have quite good literature data actually that shows that formal mentorship programs don't work as well as the informal ones. Just people you come across and that you get along with and you just keep in touch like that, like Binka and Justin are saying. So you will meet those people, but the match is really important. And it's totally fine to pick up and drop mentors as well. Like, there are people that I've mentored quite intensively through critical parts of their journey, and then of course you don't mentor them quite as heavily afterwards. You remain friends, but you're not in a mentorship position anymore. That's totally fine as well, because we know that we're providing different things. Some of them just want help to, you are literally their cheer squad to get them through an exam or whatever. For some of them, it's picking them up when they failed a rotation or failed an exam. You're the kind of shoulder to cry on. You pick them up and then get them well again and get them strong again and send them on their way. For others, it's a transactional thing. They are with you to complete a research project or to get something done, or to get selected onto surgery. And so it's fine. Those of us who do a lot of mentorship will know that these things are ever changing. The mentorships will grow and change. And of course, the great thing about mentorship, the reward for us being mentors, is that these people become your colleagues, which is just superb. Your heart swells with so much pride when you see them come through. Paul knows that feeling. One of his proteges is now in our obstetric unit here on the Gold Coast, and it's just, I know that every time she pops up and does something wonderful, Paul will feel that he had a hand to play in that. So it's very rewarding.
Yeah, can I just say, for that particular person, we had, when she was a medical student, we had a very intense moment where we bonded, and we've meant something to each other ever since. And I haven't been close on mentor, but I've kept in touch with her across all those years. And it is a wonderful, meaningful feeling, and that's what keeps me going, really.
It's quite funny. I don't know about Binka, but one thing that I'm absolutely shit scared of now is that people are looking to me to be a mentor. People are asking me to be a mentor as well. And it's quite funny, like at the Indigenous Doctors Conference last year, I was talking with Kelvin about it. And Kelvin was like, well, now you know how I've felt like for however many years that I've been a surgeon. Like, it's your turn now. Like, you guys have to have a go at like mentoring these Indigenous medical students or junior doctors. So, and even even my non-Indigenous medical students that I've mentored, who I've developed a mentor-mentee relationship with, it's been quite strong, but it's also very scary because, like, you don't know what you don't know, and I feel like I know absolutely nothing. So it's like, how am I gonna advise this person to do something when I don't know if I've even done it myself?
You can be reassured that we all have that feeling at all stages, no matter how senior we are. The imposter syndrome is super real.
Absolutely.
We live constantly in fear of just being suddenly found out.
100%.
Yeah. Don't worry. Just get used to, be comfortable with the discomfort. Won't go away.
Yeah.
Thanks for all that. It's really helpful, and it's especially relevant to us as future junior doctors. We're just watching the time because it's past 5 o'clock already. So do you mind just sharing one short sentence to leave us with, as well as your Twitter handle if you use Twitter?
Go on, Ria. You go first.
Oh God, why do I always have to go first though? last sentence is, oh gosh, I'm not very good at thinking of a short, pithy. I can talk the ears off a donkey, obviously, but I can't contract anything into just one sentence. The thing I would say is patience. Patience is a virtue. I felt very much, I think I get this sense from Paul as well, that there were times where you'd spend entire rotations acting, not being someone other than yourself just to get through. But the reward has been that now I'm in a position where I can change that for people coming after me. So be true to yourself, but I don't mean that you have to do that 100% of the time. There may be times where you have to make some sacrifices to your own self-identity, but the end goal is to be in a position where you can then change that for people coming after you. Oh, Twitter handle. So it's very easy, @LiangRia.
Thanks so much. Does anyone else have anything to add? Just one short sentence.
Yeah, my sentence is be kind to yourself and to other people.
Twitter handle, Paul.
Oh, sorry. It's Dr. DRPWH62, which makes me by far the oldest person here.
One sentence. Oh. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And I don't have a Twitter handle, so sorry.
Well.
We'll all wait for it.
For me, last 2 sentences, some sayings that have always sort of stuck with me. There's this one quote by Nelson Mandela, but it's actually said by this female author, but I can't remember her name, is that our biggest fear is not that we're inadequate, but it's that we are powerful beyond measure. And so I think that that's something that's very important to remember, is that you are capable, and that our biggest fear is usually that we are extremely talented and very good at what we do. And the other thing is, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, 100%. I've always been a strong believer in that one. It's quite funny, my English ancestry, I've recently found out a little bit about my English ancestry, and the family motto from the English ancestry was, he conquers who endures, which is essentially the same thing. So like, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I believe someone's just put in the chat box all of our Twitter handles. So mine's @JKaneBlocks, so CAINBLOX.
Right. Thank you so much to all of you for joining. Our speakers, Ria, Paul, Justin, and Binka. And just thanks for your valuable time, especially during this uncertain times and on a Saturday afternoon. So it's been a really educational and inspirational session with all of you. And also thanks to everyone listening for tuning in on a Saturday afternoon. So yeah, we're going to wrap up here and hope everyone stays well and safe.
Thank you.
Be careful and have fun in the lockdown, guys.